My girlfriend demanded a trial separation while still living under my roof. The audacity peaked when she introduced her new boyfriend to me, casually saying, "I told him you're just my roommate for now." Back in October, my girlfriend of 5 years cornered me in our garage. The Austin heat was finally starting to break, but inside that cinderblock box, it felt like a suffocating sauna. Delaney stood between my heavy red toolbox and a stack of flattened, moving boxes we hadn't bothered to throw out since buying the place 2 years prior. She didn't lead with a breakup. She led with a pitch. She wanted a romantic sabbatical before legally committing to marriage. She paced across the oil-stained concrete, waving her hands, claiming she felt suffocated by our domestic routine. She needed to experience life as an independent woman. Her single friends were networking downtown, drinking at speakeasies hidden behind bookshelves, and living fiercely. Meanwhile, she felt trapped playing house on the east side. I leaned against my workbench. I told her I wasn't okay with it. I told her that taking a break while sharing a $3,400 mortgage would completely break my heart. That was the wrong thing to say. She started sobbing uncontrollably. Her face went red, her breathing ragged, accusing me of being a toxic anchor weighing down her true potential. She told me I was financially and emotionally chaining her to a life she hadn't finished choosing. Then came the ultimatum. She threatened to force a sale of the house, a house I had put the entire down payment on, if I couldn't respect her journey. I sat down on a plastic storage bin. I watched her hyperventilate for 2 solid hours. She cried until her mascara stained her cheeks, until she was gasping for air between accusations. I was exhausted. I was broken down. The thought of lawyers, realtors, and tearing apart the life I'd spent half a decade building paralyzed me. So, looking at the concrete floor, I finally caved and whispered, "Fine." She had a guy over within 3 days. His name was Blake. He was some crypto investor she met at a rooftop mixer downtown. I came home from work on a Tuesday, exhausted, carrying a bag of groceries, and walked into my own kitchen. Blake was leaning against the granite island, holding one of my heavy-bottomed whiskey glasses, sipping sparkling water. He wore a slate-gray quarter zip and a gold watch that looked heavier than my car. Delaney didn't even flinch. She introduced him right there, standing next to the refrigerator I bought. "This is Blake. I told him you're my roommate for now," she said smoothly, offering him a tight, reassuring smile. I gripped the paper grocery bag so hard the celery snapped. I wanted to punch a hole straight through the drywall. Instead, I put the bag down, nodded like a coward, and walked straight to the guest room. That became my existence. Every Wednesday and Friday, she'd go out to upscale lounges. I'd lie awake on a firm, unforgiving mattress in the spare room, staring at the ceiling fan. I'd hear the front door unlock at 3:30 a.m. I'd hear her heels click across the hardwood. She'd walk right past the guest room where I was exiled and sleep in our master bedroom. Sometimes, the hallway smelled like expensive mezcal and hotel soap. I'd lie there in the dark, feeling like a pathetic ghost in my own home. This torture lasted for 3 solid months. She glowed with arrogant confidence. She started wearing expensive silk dresses on random weekday afternoons, typing furiously on her MacBook at the kitchen table, living her fierce, independent life. Meanwhile, I was a hollow shell. I dropped 12 pounds. My cheekbones jutted out. I lived on black coffee from the office machine and stale toast I forced down over the kitchen sink before she woke up. One Sunday morning, I couldn't take the silence of the house anymore. I took my dog to a different park across town just to escape the zip code. The air was crisp, the grass damp with morning dew. I let the dog off the leash, and he immediately ran up to a woman sitting on a wooden bench, dropping a wet tennis ball at her feet. Her name was Sophia. She laughed, threw the ball, and we got talking. She casually asked if I wanted to grab lunch at a nearby food truck. I hadn't sat across from a woman who actually looked at me in months. 1 hour easily turned into 4. We sat on a splintered picnic table eating brisket tacos. We talked about mid-century architecture, my childhood in Oregon, and things Delaney hadn't bothered to ask about in half a decade. Sophia didn't look at her phone once. For the first time in an eternity, I felt entirely human. Then, the dynamic in my house violently shifted. Delaney's trendy tech startup completely collapsed. It wasn't a slow decline, it was a massacre. Her major investors abruptly pulled out after a disastrous quarterly review, and she was fired without severance. Worse, the very moment her income and her founder status vanished, Blake completely ghosted her. His number disconnected. His Instagram disappeared. She knocked on my guest room door at 7:00 a.m. on a Friday. I opened it to find her standing there in an oversized t-shirt, sobbing hysterically. It looked exactly like the performance in the garage, just reversed. Suddenly, the romantic sabbatical was a terrible mistake. It was ruining our deep connection. She desperately wanted to cancel the break instantly. She demanded I move back into the master bedroom so we could tackle her financial crisis as a united front. I looked at her. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel love. I just felt an overwhelming, freezing apathy. I flatly refused. She lost her mind. She screamed about how I was abandoning her at her absolute lowest point. She threw a coffee mug at the wall, shattering it into ceramic shards on the baseboards. The hypocrisy was staggering. I had needed my partner for 3 months while she treated me like garbage, parading her crypto boyfriend through my kitchen. I didn't raise my voice. I just closed the door and kept seeing Sophia. Last week, Sophia and I were having dinner at her place. She poured 2 glasses of wine, sat down across from me, and casually mentioned she had been offered a regional promotion in Denver. She asked if I wanted to go with her and start over. I didn't even have to think about it. When I got home that evening, Delaney was sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly aimlessly at her laptop screen, hunting for jobs that didn't exist. I walked up to the opposite side of the granite counter. I slid a thick manila folder across the smooth stone. It stopped right next to her trackpad. "What is this?" she asked, her voice visibly trembling. "It's a formal buyout agreement. I'm refinancing the house into my name only, taking my equity and renting it out. You have exactly 30 days to vacate." She stared at me like I had ripped her heart out. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for a long time. Finally, she choked out, "You can't do this. We are supposed to be a team." I zipped up my jacket. I looked around the kitchen, the espresso machine we bought together, the bar stool she picked out, the very spot Blake had stood holding my whiskey glass. I looked back at her and fed her exact words right back to her. "I just feel suffocated by this domestic routine." I turned around and walked out the front door. As the heavy brass deadbolt clicked shut behind me, I realized I hadn't felt this incredibly free in years. The Texas evening air felt thin and cool in my lungs. I got into my car and started driving toward Sophia's apartment. I was halfway there, stopped at a red light on Lamar Boulevard, when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Not a call, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You should know why Blake really disappeared. It wasn't the money. Check what Sophia told him about you before you two ever met at that park." I stared at the glowing screen. The light turned green. Someone behind me laid on their horn. I hit the gas, pulled into a brightly lit gas station parking lot a block away, and threw the car in park. My pulse was throbbing in my ears. The Austin streetlights blurred above me through the windshield. I picked up the phone. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared on the screen, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Someone who watched her pick you very carefully." I sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly deafening. I didn't put the car in drive. I just stared at the text. "Check what Sophia told him about you before you two ever met." My mind started racing backward, tearing through the last few weeks. The coincidences, the easy conversation at the park, how perfectly her interests aligned with mine, how she never asked about my living situation until I brought it up, but when I did, she already seemed to know I owned the property on the east side. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "If you're driving to her place, don't. Go to the Ginger Man pub on Lavaca. Back booth. I'm wearing a green jacket. You need to see these screenshots before you sign any refinance paperwork." I looked at the clock on the dash. It was 8:15 p.m. Sophia was expecting me. I had just walked out of my house, burning the bridge with Delaney to the ground, high on the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. I was supposed to be walking into a fresh start in Denver. Instead, I put the car in reverse, backed out of the gas station, and pointed the headlights toward downtown. The pub was loud, smelling heavily of stale beer and fried food. It was packed with the usual Thursday night tech crowd, guys in Patagonia vests and women with perfectly messy hair. I pushed through the crowd toward the back. In the corner booth, mostly shadowed by a broken pendant light, sat a guy I vaguely recognized. He had a green canvas jacket draped over the chair next to him. He didn't look like a crypto bro. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes and was nursing a dark stout. I slid into the booth across from him. "Who are you?" He pushed a condensation-covered glass of water toward me. "My name is Cormac. I was the lead developer at Delaney's startup before the board gutted us and left us with nothing." I frowned. "I know who you are. Delaney mentioned you. What does that have to do with Blake or Sophia?" Cormac took a slow sip of his beer. "Blake didn't meet Delaney at a rooftop mixer by accident, and he didn't leave because the startup failed. He left because his job was done." "His job?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow in my own throat. "What is this? Some kind of movie?" "He was a crypto investor who wanted to sleep with my girlfriend." "Blake isn't an investor," Cormac said, his voice flat, devoid of any drama. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, unlocking it and sliding it across the sticky wooden table. "Blake is a real estate scout. He works for a private equity firm that buys up distressed residential properties in up-and-coming Austin neighborhoods, specifically the East Side." I looked down at the phone. It was a LinkedIn profile. The picture was Blake, looking a little younger, wearing a suit. The title under his name read, "Acquisitions Manager, Sorel Holdings." "Okay," I said, my chest tightening. "So he buys houses. Delaney owned half of ours. How does that make him leaving a job?" "Because he wasn't after Delaney's half," Cormac said softly. "He was after yours. He needed Delaney to force a sale. That was the whole point of him isolating her, inflating her ego, making her think she was this fierce, independent founder. He was pushing her to cut ties with you, force the buyout, and liquidate the asset. His firm had a cash offer ready to swoop in the second the house hit the market. It's a standard pressure tactic they use on couples in gentrifying zip codes. Break the couple. Buy the house cheap in the chaotic split." I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered Delaney in the garage. "I'll force a sale if I have to." It was Blake's script. He was feeding it to her. When the startup collapsed, Cormac continued, Delaney lost her leverage. She couldn't afford the legal fees to force a partition sale anymore. She was broke. The second she became a financial liability instead of a willing seller, Blake vanished. He moved on to the next target. I sat back against the vinyl booth. It made a sickening kind of sense. The arrogance, the sudden rush to push me out of the master bedroom, the constant pressure. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a real estate play. "Okay," I breathed out, rubbing my temples. "That explains Blake. He's a parasite. But you texted me about Sophia." Cormac looked down at his glass. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he swiped his finger across his phone screen, moving to the next photo. "Look at this one," he said. I leaned forward. It was a screenshot of a text thread. The contact name at the top was B. Sorel Blake. The texts were from 3 months ago, right around the time I met Sophia at the park. "B. Sorel, the girlfriend is tapped out. out. Startup went under. She can't force the sale. Gray Bubble, does he have the cash to buy her out himself? B. Sorrell, yeah, he's got the equity. He'll just refi and keep the house. Gray Bubble, we need him to sell, not refi. Where is he right now? B. Sorrell, taking the dog to Zilker. He's broken, looking for an exit strategy. Gray Bubble, I'm in the area. I'll bump into him. If I can get him to leave the state, he'll want to liquidate the property rather than manage a rental from afar. I have an offer in Denver I can use. I stared at the Gray Bubbles. The words swam in front of my eyes. I'll bump into him. I have an offer in Denver. I looked up at Cormac. My mouth was bone dry. Who is the Gray Bubble? Who do you think? Cormac said quietly. Sophia is Blake's sister. She's the senior acquisitions director at the same firm. The noise of the pub seemed to completely fade away. The clinking glasses, the loud laughter from the bar, the thumping bass of the jukebox, it all turned to static. I thought about the brisket tacos. I thought about her laughing at my dog. I thought about the 4 hours of perfect conversation. The way she made me feel seen, made me feel human after months of being treated like a ghost. It was all a profile. It was an intake interview. She wasn't saving me. She was guiding me out the door so her firm could buy my house. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why do you care? Because Delaney screwed me over too, Cormac said, his jaw tightening. When the startup went down, she threw me under the bus to the board to try and save her own equity. She ruined my reputation in this town. I wanted to see her lose everything. I started tracking Blake to see if I could use him against her. That's how I found out about the real estate angle. But when I saw you tonight, walking out of that house with that manila folder, I knew you were walking right into the second half of the trap. I looked back down at the phone. I had just handed Delaney a buyout agreement. I told her I was going to refinance and keep the house as a rental. But if I moved to Denver with Sophia, the logistics of managing an East Austin property from 1,000 miles away would suddenly become too much. Sophia would casually suggest selling it. She would even have a friend who could take it off my hands for a fair cash price. They were going to get the house either way. Where's the refinance paperwork right now? Cormac asked. In my car, I said numbly. I haven't filed it with the bank yet. I just gave Delaney the notice. Don't sign it, Cormac said. If you refinance, you take on all the debt. If you leave for Denver, you're on the hook for a $3,400 mortgage in a city you don't live in, managed by a woman who is actively trying to force you into a distressed sale. I grabbed the edge of the table. The sheer humiliation of it burned in my chest, hot and suffocating. I wasn't the victor walking away from a toxic relationship. I was the mark. Two separate people had systematically dismantled my life, my confidence, and my home, all for a plot of dirt in a gentrifying neighborhood. I stood up. Where are you going? Cormac asked. Sophia's, I said. Don't be stupid, Cormac warned, leaning forward. You walk in there angry, she'll know the play is blown. She'll vanish just like Blake did. These people don't fight. They liquidate and move on. I'm not going to fight her, I said. I pulled a $20 bill out of my wallet and tossed it on the table. I'm going to tell her I'm so excited about Denver that I've decided to list the house on the open market tomorrow morning with a competing broker. I walked out of the pub and back into the humid Texas night. My phone was buzzing again. It was Sophia. Hey, wine is poured. Dinner is almost ready. Are you on your way? I unlocked my car, threw the manila folder onto the passenger seat, and stared at it in the dim glow of the dome light. The game wasn't over. It had just changed. I typed a response with my thumb, my hand still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Traffic on Lamar is brutal. Give me 15 minutes. She replied almost instantly. No worries. Take your time. It's worth the wait. I stared at the little smiley face emoji. It made my stomach turn. I dropped the phone into the cup holder, put the car in drive, and headed south. Sophia lived in a newly built mid-rise complex just off South Congress. It was one of those interchangeable buildings painted charcoal gray, featuring a courtyard pool and a minimalist lobby that smelled like fake eucalyptus. I parked in the visitor garage, sat in my car for a full 2 minutes staring at the concrete wall, and practiced my expression in the rearview mirror. I had to look like a guy who had just made the hardest, most liberating decision of his life. I couldn't look like a guy who knew he was sitting across from a corporate predator. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor and knocked on door 412. She opened it wearing a loose, comfortable sweater and dark jeans. She had a wooden spoon in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other. She gave me that warm, easy smile that had completely disarmed me at the park. You made it, she said, stepping aside to let me in. She leaned up and kissed me on the cheek. Her perfume smelled familiar. Expensive. I made it, I said, forcing a smile. I walked into her apartment. It was immaculate. Too immaculate. The furniture looked like it was bought entirely out of a catalog in one single purchase. There were no personal photos, no clutter, just strategic coffee table books about mid-century design and a few thriving houseplants. It didn't look like a home. It looked like staging. Dinner is just about done, she said, walking back into the open kitchen. Pour yourself a glass. The bottle is open on the counter. I walked over, picked up the bottle of Cabernet, and poured a generous amount into a stemless glass. My hands were steady now. The freezing apathy I had felt toward Delaney had returned, but this time it was directed at the woman stirring pasta sauce 10 feet away from me. So, Sophia said, leaning against the counter and taking a sip of her wine. Her eyes locked onto mine, full of practiced empathy. How did it go? Did you talk to her? I did, I said. I took a slow drink of my wine. It tasted like ash in my mouth. I gave her the 30-day notice, told her I was taking the house. Sophia's expression shifted just for a fraction of a second, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. If Cormac hadn't shown me me those texts, I never would have noticed it. Wow, she breathed, setting her glass down. She walked over and put a hand on my arm. That must have been incredibly hard. How are you feeling? Free. I lied smoothly. You were right. I needed to cut the anchor. And about Denver, I want to do it. I want to go with you. Her face lit up. It was a spectacular performance. She threw her arms around my neck and hugged me tight. Are you serious? Oh my God, that's amazing. We're going to have such a great time up there. It's exactly the fresh start you need. She pulled back, beaming, but I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. The house was still the loose end. She needed me to liquidate, not hold. There's just one thing, I said, setting my wine glass down on the quartz countertop. I kept my voice casual, light. Managing a rental property in East Austin while living in Colorado sounds like a complete nightmare. What if the act goes out in July? What if Delaney trashes the place before she leaves? I don't want to deal with it. Sophia nodded slowly, her expression morphing into thoughtful concern. You know, I was actually thinking the exact same thing earlier today. Being a long-distance landlord is incredibly stressful. You'd lose half your rental income to a property management company anyway. Exactly, I agreed. So I decided to just wash my hands of the whole thing. You're going to sell it? She asked softly. The bait was floating right in front of her. Yeah, I called a broker on the drive over here. A guy named Griffin I've known for a few years. He's an absolute shark. He said the East Side market is starved for inventory right now. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms, playing the part of the excited seller. He's coming over tomorrow morning to sign the listing agreement. We're putting it on the MLs by Friday afternoon. Griffin thinks we can trigger a bidding war and get 20% over the current comps. Sophia didn't blink, but her smile became painfully rigid. A bidding war on the open market was the absolute last thing Sorrel Holdings wanted. They needed an off-market distressed sale, bought cheap for cash. That's great, she said, her voice dropping half an octave. But you know, the open market can be so brutal. The staging, the endless weekend showings, people walking through your bedroom while you're at work. And if the inspection turns up anything, buyers will nickel and dime you to death. Griffin says it's worth the headache, I replied cheerfully. He thinks I can walk away with an extra $100 grand in equity. Sophia picked up her wooden spoon again. Her knuckles were white. You know, a friend of mine actually works in real estate investment here in Austin. They buy properties as is, for cash. No showings, no inspections, no broker fees. You just pick your closing date and walk away. I could call him, see if he can make you an offer tomorrow before you sign anything with this Griffin guy. I looked at her, really looked at her. It was terrifying how easily the lies poured out of her mouth, dressed up as favors. A friend of mine, Blake, or whatever acquisitions lackey was next in line. I appreciate it, I said, keeping my tone perfectly oblivious. But I told Griffin I'd give him the listing. Besides, an investor is going to lowball me. I want top dollar. I need a massive nest egg if we're going to buy a place in Denver, right? I smiled at her. She smiled back. It was a Mexican standoff disguised as a romantic dinner. Before she could formulate her next pivot, my phone vibrated loudly against the quartz counter. The screen lit up. It was Delaney. You should probably take that, Sophia said quietly, stepping back to the stove. I picked up the phone and walked over to the sliding glass door. I slid it open and stepped out onto the narrow balcony. The traffic on South Congress hummed below me. I hit accept and put the phone to my ear. What do you want, Delaney? Someone was just here, she said. Her voice was thin, frantic, bordering on hysterics. She sounded entirely unhinged from the confident woman who had demanded a romantic sabbatical at the house. Who? I don't know. A guy in a suit. He knocked on the door 10 minutes after you left. He handed me a folder. I heard paper rustling aggressively over the speaker. It's a cash offer for the house from a company called Sorrel Holdings. I gripped the metal railing of the balcony. Cormac was right. They weren't waiting. The second Blake learned I was keeping the house, they escalated. They knew the 30-day clock was ticking, so they sent a physical scout to rattle Delaney's cage directly. Throw it away, I told her, my voice low and hard. Are you insane? Delaney shrieked. Look at the numbers they're offering. We could split this. If we take this offer, I can pay off the debt from the startup and you can take your half and leave. You don't have to refinance. You don't have to rent it out. We can just be done with each other in 10 days. I said, no, I'm not selling to them. You don't have a choice, she yelled. I still own half this house. I haven't signed your stupid buyout agreement yet. If I want to sell to this company, I can force the issue. I will drag you into court. I will bleed you dry in legal fees until you have no choice but to take this cash offer. She was echoing the script again. The script Blake had undoubtedly reinforced through this new representative at the door. They were turning her back into a weapon, aiming her straight at my equity. Don't sign anything, I said. Don't call the number on that paper. I already did, Delaney snapped. The guy is coming back tomorrow at noon to write up the contract. You better be here or I'm signing my half over to them and letting them deal with you. She hung up. The line went dead. I stood on the balcony, staring out at the Austin skyline glowing against the dark clouds. The humid air stuck to my skin. I looked back through the glass door. Sophia was standing at the kitchen island, her back to me, furiously typing on her phone, probably texting the guy in the suit, or texting Blake, telling them the pressure was working. I pocketed my phone. I took a deep breath, smoothing out my expression, burying the rage deep down in my chest. I slid the glass door open and stepped back inside. Everything okay? Sophia asked, casually tossing her phone onto the counter and picking up her wine glass. Yeah, I said. I walked over and picked up my own glass. Just Delaney throwing a tantrum about the timeline. Nothing I can't handle. Good, she said softly. Dinner's ready. We ate at her small dining table. The pasta was incredible. A rich ragu that she claimed cream took her 3 hours to simmer, but I tasted nothing. Every bite felt like chewing cardboard. I kept my eyes on her, maintaining eye contact, smiling at the right intervals. She told me more about Denver, about the neighborhood we could look at, Washington Park. She had pulled up Zillow listings on her phone and was sliding them across the table. I looked at the screen, feigning excitement over brick bungalows and mountain views. It's perfect, I said, handing the phone back. Seriously, I can't wait to get out of Texas. I'm so glad, she said, her hand resting over mine. Her skin felt warm, but the gesture made my blood run cold. And don't worry about the Austin house. Honestly, if Griffin gives you a good valuation tomorrow, that's great. But if you want a faster exit, my friend's firm is always looking. I just want you to be stress-free. She's so good at this, I thought. I'll keep it in mind, I promised. I left her apartment around 10. I kissed her goodnight at the door, told her I'd call her after the meeting with the broker, and walked to the elevator with a relaxed gait. The second the metal doors slid shut, I leaned back against the wall and let out a long, ragged exhale. The charade was exhausting. I got into my car and didn't go back to the east side. I drove to a 24-hour diner off I-35, parked under a flickering neon sign, and ordered black coffee. I pulled out my laptop and tethered it to my phone. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I searched Sorrell Holdings Austin. The website was sleek, sanitized, urban renewal, community-focused redevelopment, cash solutions for distressed assets. It was corporate speak for gentrification vultures. I dug deeper into state business filings. The LLC was registered in Delaware, but the managing directors included Sophia Sorrell and Blake Sorrell. It was a family-run predatory operation masquerading as a corporate equity firm. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Cormac. Did you burn it down? I typed back, no. I played along. Delaney called while I was there. Sorrell sent a guy to the house with a cash offer. She's threatening to sign her half over to them tomorrow at noon. Cormac called me less than 10 seconds later. You're an idiot for staying, he said, skipping the greeting. If Delaney signs her half to Sorrell, you're not dealing with an angry ex-girlfriend anymore. You're dealing with a multi-million-dollar corporation as your co-owner. They will force a partition lawsuit. They have lawyers on retainer just for this. They'll bleed you dry in court until you agree to sell your half to them for pennies on the dollar to cover the legal fees. I know, I said, staring at my reflection in the diner window. That's why I'm not letting her sign. How? You can't lock her in a closet. I need leverage on her. Something that makes her realize Sorrell is playing her. Or something that makes her back off the sale entirely. You worked with her at the startup. You said she threw you under the bus to the board. What exactly did she do? Cormac sighed, a heavy sound crackling through the phone speaker. She forged the user acquisition metrics. We were burning cash, and the Series B funding was entirely dependent on hitting 50,000 active daily users. We were stalling at 12,000. Delaney panicked. She paid a click farm in Bangalore to flood the servers with phantom traffic. When the board audited the tech stack and found the bot traffic, she claimed I wrote the script and hid it from her. They fired me for cause. Then the whole thing collapsed anyway when the investors realized the revenue didn't match the traffic. I sat up straighter in the vinyl booth. Did you prove she did it? No, he said bitterly. She used her admin privileges to wipe the communication logs on the Slack channels before the audit. It was my word against hers. What if you had those logs? I asked. I'm a developer, man, not a magician. The data is gone. Delaney uses a local backup, I said, my pulse picking up. She never trusted cloud storage after she got locked out of her Apple ID in college. Every Friday night, she plugs a 2-terabyte Seagate external hard drive into her MacBook and runs a full-time machine backup. I know, because I bought her the drive for Christmas 3 years ago. Silence on the line. Then, if the startup went under 3 months ago, that drive has the entire history of the Slack channel before she wiped the cloud servers. Where is she keeping it? Usually in the top drawer of the desk in the guest room, I said, which is the room I've been sleeping in for 3 months. Get it, Cormac said, his voice suddenly sharp, energized. If I can extract the ClickFarm receipts from that backup, she committed wire fraud. The investors lost $4 million based on those fake metrics. If she hands Sorrell her half of the house, I hand the investors the proof of her fraud. She'll trade her equity for prison time. I'm going to the house right now, I said. I'll meet you at my place. Bring the drive. I slammed the laptop shut, left a $5 bill on the table for the coffee, and sprinted to my car. It was 11:30 p.m. I drove back to the east side, keeping the headlights off as I pulled into my own driveway. The house was completely dark. Delaney was definitely asleep. She took melatonin at 10 o'clock like clockwork and slept like the dead. I slid my key into the front door, turning it as slowly as possible. The deadbolt clicked open with a soft metallic thud. I stepped inside. The air conditioning was humming loudly, masking the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood. I crept down the hallway, bypassing the master bedroom where the door was firmly shut, and slipped into the guest room. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin white stripes across the floor. I went straight to the small writing desk in the corner. I opened the top drawer. It squeaked slightly. I froze, holding my breath. Nothing but the hum of the act. I reached inside and felt around. Pens, a stack of sticky notes, a stray charging cable, no hard drive. I pulled out my phone and used the screen to illuminate the drawer. Empty. I checked the bottom drawer. Just old tax documents. Panic flared in my chest. I scanned the room, the bedside table, the closet. Nothing. I walked back out to the hallway. Where else would she put it? She had been working from the kitchen island all week hunting for jobs. I crept into the kitchen, the same spot where I had handed her the buyout agreement a few hours ago. Her MacBook wasn't on the counter. Then I I saw it, on the coffee table in the living room, her laptop bag. I knelt beside it and unzipped the front pocket. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. The silver Seagate drive. I shoved it deep into my jacket pocket. What are you doing? The voice came from the hallway. I spun around. Delaney was standing there in the shadows, clutching her phone to her chest. Her eyes were wide, adjusting to the dark. I forgot some clothes. I lied smoothly, keeping my hands away from my jacket. I didn't want to wake you. She walked forward, stopping just at the edge of the living room rug. You didn't take any clothes. You're fully dressed. She looked down at the unzipped laptop bag. Her eyes darted back up to me, narrowing. What did you take out of my bag? Nothing, I said, taking a step toward the front door. I'm leaving. Show me your hands, she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. You took the drive. You're trying to steal my backup so I can't access my old portfolio for job applications. I'm not stealing anything, Delaney. Go back to sleep. Give it back, she yelled, lunging toward me. I stepped sideways, dodging her, and she slammed into the arm of the sofa. You're trying to ruin me. You want me homeless and unemployable so you can steal the house. I'm not the one trying to steal the house, I shot back, my patience snapping. You're selling us out to a corporate firm tomorrow at noon because some scout wearing a suit told you to. You're being played, Delaney. Blake worked for them. He wasn't your boyfriend. He was an acquisitions manager assigned to break us up so they could buy the property cheap. She stopped. She stood perfectly still by the sofa, her breathing heavy. She stared at me, processing the words. I waited for the realization to hit her. I waited for the horror of what Blake had done to finally break through her arrogance. Instead, she let out a short, harsh laugh. You think I care? She said, her voice dropping into a cold, mocking sneer. I stared at her. What? You think I care why Blake was here? She walked over to the wall switch and flicked on the living room lights, blinding me for a second. I knew Blake wasn't really a crypto investor 3 weeks into it. I saw the emails on his phone while he was in the shower. I knew exactly who he worked for and what Sorrel Holdings did. The room spun slightly. I felt like I had just stepped off a ledge. You knew? And you still let him push me out? I used him, she snapped, crossing her arms. I needed out of this suffocating relationship, but I couldn't afford the legal fees to force a partition sale on my own. When I realized Blake was an acquisition scout, it was perfect. He was highly motivated to get you out of the picture. I let him play his little game, let him isolate me, let him think he was manipulating me. But really, I was getting a free, dedicated broker working overtime to liquidate this house so I could take my cash and walk. She stepped closer, her face twisted in a smug, victorious expression. And then the startup failed, I said quietly, connecting the dots. And you lost your leverage. You couldn't threaten me with a lawyer anymore, so Blake dropped you. A temporary setback, she said, waving a hand dismissively. But then you handed me that buyout agreement tonight. You gave me the opening I needed. I called the number on Blake's old business card. I told them you were trying to refinance and keep the property. I told them if they wanted it, they had to move now. That's why the guy in the suit showed up tonight. I summoned him. I was completely floored. The depth of her sociopathy was staggering. She hadn't been a victim of Sorrel's predatory tactics. She had actively collaborated with them to destroy my life just to get a faster payout. So keep the stupid hard drive, she said, pointing at the front door. There's nothing on it that matters anyway. Tomorrow at noon, I'm signing a legally binding contract with Sorrel Holdings to sell them my 50% stake in this property for $300,000 cash. And once they own half, they will crush you in court. You'll be begging to sell them your half just to stop the bleeding. Get out of my house. I looked at her one last time. There was no person left in there that I recognized, just a hollow, grasping void of ambition and entitlement. I turned around and walked out the door. I didn't say another word. I drove straight to Cormac's apartment in North Austin. It was a small, cramped one-bedroom filled with towering stacks of servers and computer monitors. He was sitting at his desk in the dark, bathed in the blue light of 3 different screens. I tossed the Seagate drive onto the desk next to his keyboard. I got it, I said, collapsing onto a folding chair in the corner. But the timeline just accelerated. She knew about Blake. She knew about Sorrel. She actively used them against me. She's signing the contract at noon tomorrow, and she doesn't care about anything else. Cormac picked up the drive, inspecting the connection port. She'll care about this. If I find the Slack logs, this isn't a civil dispute. It's federal wire fraud. How long will it take you to crack the backup partition? He plugged the drive into a dock and started typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard, the keys clacking aggressively in the quiet room. She used Apple's standard file vault encryption. Assuming she didn't use a randomly generated alphanumeric password, I can run a dictionary attack based on her common passwords. Did she have a standard password she used for everything? Yeah, I said, rubbing my face. It was the name of her childhood dog, followed by the year we bought the house. Buster 2024, Cormac typed it in and hit enter. A green progress bar appeared on the center screen. Bypass successful. Mounting the drive. You're lucky she's arrogant and lazy. We sat there for the next 4 hours. Cormac drank 3 Red Bulls and combed through thousands of archived files, digging deep into the hidden library folders of the backup. I paced the small apartment, my mind racing through the upcoming confrontation. I couldn't just walk in and threaten her. I needed the execution to be flawless. At 4:15 a.m., Cormac stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair and took a slow, deep breath. Got you, he whispered. I rushed over and looked at the screen. It was a text document, a raw export of a Slack channel labeled hatchedmetrics_internal. There was a message from Delaney's account, dated 2 weeks before the Series B funding closed. Delaney, the organic traffic is stalling. The board is breathing down my neck. Wire the $15K to the vendor in Bangalore and spin up the bot farms. We need $50K active users on the dashboard by Friday or we lose the funding. Beneath it was a reply from a contractor. Contractor, acknowledged. Firing up the proxies. The traffic will look legitimate to the Google Analytics API. There it is, Cormac said, pointing at the screen. Smoking gun. She explicitly ordered the artificial inflation of metrics to secure investor capital. That is textbook fraud. Print it, I said, a cold wave of relief washing over me. Print all of it. Cormac sent the file to a laser printer in the corner of the room. The machine whirred to life, spitting out 10 pages of damning evidence. He gathered the pages, stapled them together, and handed them to me. What's the play? He asked, looking at me with bloodshot eyes. You take this to the police? No, I said, sliding the papers into the manila folder I had used for the buyout agreement. The police take months to investigate white-collar crime. I don't have months. I have until noon today. I'm going to take this to the meeting. You're going to blackmail her into backing out of the sale? I'm not going to blackmail her, I said, looking at the clock. It was 5:00 a.m. I'm going to give her a choice. I left Cormac's apartment and drove back to the diner. I couldn't go home, and I couldn't go to Sophia's. I sat in a booth for 7 hours, drinking bad coffee and watching the sun rise over the highway. My phone remained silent. No texts from Sophia. No calls from Delaney. The calm before the storm. At 11:45 a.m., I paid my tab and drove to the east side. There was a sleek black Mercedes sedan parked in my driveway. The license plate frame read Sorrel Holdings. I parked on the street, grabbed the manila folder from the passenger seat, and walked up to the front door. I didn't bother using my key. I knocked loudly, 3 times. Delaney opened the door. She was wearing a sharp tailored blazer and dark jeans, dressed like she was going into a board meeting. Her expression tightened when she saw me, but she didn't block the doorway. You're early, she said coldly. The representative is already here in the kitchen. We're reviewing the contract. Perfect, I said, stepping past her into the house. I walked down the hallway and turned into the kitchen. Sitting on one of the bar stools at the Granite Island was a man I didn't recognize. He was in his late 30s, wearing a custom-fit navy suit, his hair slicked back. He had a leather portfolio open in front of him, a gold pen resting on top of a thick stack of legal documents. He looked up and gave me a polite, practiced smile. You must be the co-owner. I'm Mr. Vance, Senior Acquisitions Director for Sorrel Holdings. Where's Blake? I asked flatly, stopping on the opposite side of the island. Vance's smile didn't waver. Blake has been reassigned to another territory. I'm handling the finalization of this particular asset. He gestured to the papers. Your partner here has agreed to our terms for her 50% stake. I understand you're currently exploring a refinance option, but I assure you, dealing with a corporate co-owner can be quite burdensome. We're prepared to offer you the exact same cash payout for your half today, closing in 10 days. Clean break for everyone. Delaney walked into the kitchen and stood next to Vance, crossing her arms. She looked at me with an expression of absolute triumph. Just sign it and be done with it, she said. You've lost. Take the money and go to Denver with Sophia. I looked at Vance, then at Delaney. I placed the manila folder on the granite counter right next to his leather portfolio. I'm not going to Denver, I said calmly, and I'm not selling. Vance chuckled softly, picking up his gold pen. Sir, I don't think you understand the legal reality of the situation. If she signs this contract today, Sorrel Holdings becomes your partner. We will immediately file a partition lawsuit to force a public auction of the property. The legal fees will devour your equity. You will walk away with nothing. This cash offer is a courtesy. I understand the legal reality perfectly, I said. I opened the manila folder and pulled out the stapled stack of printed Slack logs. I slid it across the island until it stopped inches from Delaney's hand. What is this? She asked, frowning. It's a conversation you had with a click farm in Bangalore, I said, my voice steady, betraying zero emotion. Specifically the one where you ordered them to fabricate user metrics to defraud your Series B investors out of $4 million. Cormac cracked your backup drive last night. The color instantly drained from Delaney's face. She stared at the top page, her eyes scanning the text. Her hands started to tremble, the confident posture completely shattering. You're bluffing, she whispered, but the terror in her eyes said otherwise. Page 3, I said. You explicitly detail the wire transfer details. Page 5 is the confirmation receipt from the vendor. Vance frowned, leaning over to look at the papers. He wasn't smiling anymore. What is this about? We are here to conduct a real estate transaction. This is about leverage, Mr. Vance, I said, looking directly at him. Delaney is about to make a choice. Option 1. She signs your contract, takes your $300,000, and I immediately email this entire file to the Texas Attorney General's office and the lead investors of her former board. She goes to federal prison for wire fraud, and the SEC seizes her assets, including the $300,000 you just paid her. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator seemed deafening. Option 2, I continued, turning my gaze back to Delaney. She signs the buyout agreement I gave her yesterday. She relinquishes her entire 50% stake in this house to me today for $0. In exchange, I put these printed logs through a shredder, I wipe the backup drive, and she walks out that front door and never speaks to me again. Delaney gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She looked like she was going to be sick. You can't do that. You're stealing my equity. I put money into this house. You put $0 down, I reminded her sharply. You paid half the mortgage for 2 years. Think of it as rent, or think of it as the cost of staying out of a federal penitentiary. It's your call. Vance stood up. His professional demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. He looked at Delaney, assessing her panic. He knew a liability when he saw one. "We don't deal with assets entangled in criminal fraud investigations," Vance said sharply. He reached out and pulled the contract away from Delaney, sliding it back into his portfolio. "Sorrel Holdings is withdrawing its offer." "Wait," Delaney pleaded, reaching out toward the portfolio. "Don't. He won't send it. He's too soft. He wouldn't actually do it." Vance ignored her. He zipped up the portfolio, shot me a dark look, and walked briskly out of the kitchen. A few seconds later, the front door opened and closed. We were alone. Delaney stared at the empty space where Vance had been standing, then slowly turned her head to look at me. Tears were welling up in her eyes, ruining her careful makeup. "You planned this," she choked out, her voice cracking. "You and Cormac." "No," I said, pulling my original buyout agreement out from the bottom of the folder and sliding it across the counter. "I planned on offering you a fair buyout and moving on. You're the one who decided to play games with corporate vultures. I just changed the rules." I pulled a pen from my jacket pocket and placed it on top of the agreement. "Sign it," I said. She looked at the pen. She looked at the printed Slack logs. She started to cry. Real, heavy sobs, exactly like she had in the garage months ago. But this time, I didn't feel bad. I didn't sit on a plastic bin and wait for it to end. I just stood there, immovable. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She flipped to the last page and scribbled her signature on the dotted line. She threw the pen onto the counter. "You're a monster." "I'm a homeowner," I corrected her. I pulled the signed agreement toward me and put it safely into the folder. "You have until tomorrow at noon to get your things out of the guest room. Leave the keys on the counter." I picked up the printed Slack logs. I walked over to the garbage disposal in the sink, shredded the papers into small pieces with my hands, and shoved them down the drain. I turned on the water and flipped the switch, grinding the evidence into pulp. "Have a good life, Delaney," I said over the noise of the disposal. I walked out of the house. I got into my car. The Mercedes was already gone. I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest. I had the house. I had beaten them. But as I started the engine, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sophia. "We need to talk. I know what you did to Vance. Come to my office. 400 Congress Ave, Suite 1200. Now, I stared at the screen. The victory tasted sweet for about 30 seconds. Sorrel Holdings hadn't just walked away. I had embarrassed one of their directors, and now the sister was stepping in. I put the car in drive and headed toward downtown. The game wasn't over. I pulled into a parking garage off 5th Street, the tires squealing slightly on the tight, polished concrete spiral. I found a spot on the 4th level, killed the engine, and sat there for a minute, staring at my knuckles resting on the steering wheel. I had just blackmailed my ex-girlfriend into signing away $500,000 in equity to avoid federal prison. I had just watched a corporate shark pack up his leather briefcase and run. I was supposed to be celebrating. Instead, I felt a tight, cold knot forming in my stomach. I grabbed the manila folder with the signed buyout agreement, locked the car, and walked out into the blinding Austin heat. The building at 400 Congress was a towering monument of blue glass and steel. The lobby was aggressively air-conditioned, smelling of imported marble cleaner and wealth. I bypassed the security desk by blending in with a group of tech bros wearing branded vests and rode the elevator up to the 12th floor. The doors opened silently. There was no massive logo on the wall, no flashy reception area, just a set of heavy frosted glass doors with the suite number etched into the brushed metal handle. I pushed them open. A young woman at a minimalist white desk looked up, her smile perfectly rehearsed. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Sophia Sorrel," I said. Before the receptionist could reach for her phone, a voice drifted down the hallway to my right. "Send him back, Chloe." I walked past the desk and down a hall lined with glass-walled offices. Most of them were empty. At the very end was a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Colorado River. Sophia was sitting behind a massive slab of live-edge walnut that served as her desk. She wasn't wearing the cozy, oversized sweater from last night. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit jacket, her hair pulled back into a severe, sleek knot. The warm, empathetic girl from the park was completely gone. The woman sitting in front of me looked like she could fire 50 people before breakfast and not blink. She gestured to a low-slung leather chair opposite her desk. "Sit." I didn't sit. I dropped the manila folder onto the edge of her desk. "What do you want, Sophia? You told me you wanted to talk." "Talk." She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. She studied me for a long time, her expression a mix of irritation and genuine curiosity. "Vance called me from his car," she said softly. "He said you ambushed him. He said you brought physical proof of a felony committed by your co-owner, threatened to blow up her life, and forced her to sign a $0 transfer of equity while he sat there and watched." "That's a pretty accurate summary," I said. "I have to admit, I didn't see that coming," Sophia said, tilting her head. "Blake profiled you as passive, conflict-averse, the guy who sleeps in his own guest room for 3 months while his girlfriend parades another man around the kitchen. That guy doesn't usually walk into a room and execute a hostile takeover. Blake underestimated me. You all did." "Clearly," she said, letting out a short, dry laugh. "But here's the thing about you playing the tough guy. It doesn't change the math. It just changes the paperwork." She sat forward, opened a drawer, and pulled out a rolled-up architectural blueprint. She cleared a space on her desk and unrolled it, anchoring the corners with a stapler and a heavy glass paperweight. "Come look at this," she said. I hesitated, then walked around the edge of the desk. I looked down at the blueprint. It was a site map of my neighborhood on the east side. The street grid was perfectly rendered, but almost the entire block surrounding my house was shaded in a dark gray crosshatch pattern. My house, 1402 East 4th, was a tiny white square sitting right in the middle of the gray zone. Sorrel Sorrel Holdings doesn't buy individual houses just to flip them, Sophia explained, her voice dropping into a smooth, clinical cadence. We buy blocks. We aggregate adjacent parcels. We've spent the last 2 years quietly acquiring the 6 properties surrounding yours. We bought out the elderly couple behind you. We bought the duplex to your left, the vacant lot to your right, and the 3 houses across the alley. I stared at the map. The white square of my house looked like an island completely surrounded by hostile waters. We're breaking ground in 45 days on a 60-unit luxury condominium complex, she continued, tracing the perimeter of the gray zone with her manicured fingernail. It's going to be 4 stories high, mixed use, with retail on the ground floor. It is a $60 million development. She looked up at me, her eyes cold and dead. Your house is sitting right where we plan to put the underground parking ramp. You are a holdout on a parcel we need to finalize the footprint. That's why Blake was sent in. That's why I bumped into you at the park. We didn't target you because we care about your messy relationship. We targeted you because you're sitting on a piece of dirt that is holding up an 8-figure construction project. My throat felt incredibly dry. I looked from the map to her face. You faked the whole thing. The park, the lunch, the conversation about my childhood. Don't be dramatic, she said, waving a hand dismissively. I actually enjoyed the brisket tacos. You're a nice guy. I liked talking to you. But business is business. My job was to isolate you, offer you a soft landing in Denver, and get you to sell. Blake's job was to squeeze Delaney until she broke. We were running a pincer movement, and it almost worked, until you decided to grow a spine this morning. I pointed at the map. I own it now. The buyout is signed. I'm taking the equity. I'm not selling. Sophia sighed, like she was dealing with a stubborn toddler. Let me explain what happens if you don't sell. In 45 days, the bulldozers arrive. Your house will be surrounded by a construction zone for the next 3 years. We have variances from the city for the noise ordinance. It will be loud from 6 in the morning until 7 at night, 6 days a week. The dust will cover your windows. The heavy machinery will block your driveway. You said you wanted to rent the place out? Good luck finding a tenant willing to live in a vibrating dust bowl. Your rental income will be exactly 0, and you'll be paying a $3,400 mortgage out of pocket every single month while you live in Denver or wherever else you run off to. She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and clicked a pen. I am going to offer you a way out, she said. Not a lowball investor offer. I will pay you current market value for the entire house, plus a 10% premium for the inconvenience. Cash we close in 7 days. You take the money, you pay off your mortgage, you pocket the massive equity, and you walk away a very wealthy, very free man. She scribbled a number on the check, signed it, tore it out, and slid it across the walnut desk. I looked down at it. It was a staggering amount of money, more than I had ever seen in one place. It was enough to buy a house in a different state with cash. It was enough to erase the last 5 years of my life and start over completely clean. All you have to do is sign the purchase agreement, she said, leaning back again. And this whole nightmare ends today. I stared at the check. My hands were actually shaking. It was the smart play. It was the only play. If I fought her, I'd be fighting a $60 million corporate machine that owned the very ground around me. I'd go bankrupt trying to carry a dead rental property through 3 years of construction. I reached out and picked up the check. The paper felt heavy between my fingers. I looked at Sophia. She was smiling. A tiny, victorious, self-satisfied smile. It was the exact same smile Delaney had given Blake in my kitchen 3 months ago. The smile of someone who thinks they can treat human beings like disposable stepping stones. I folded the check in half, then in half again. I looked her dead in the eyes, leaned over the desk, and dropped the folded check into her half-empty coffee mug. Sophia's smile vanished instantly. She shot up out of her chair, her hands slamming flat on the desk. What the hell is wrong with you? Are you stupid? No, I said, picking up my manila folder. I'm just really looking forward to the noise. I hear heavy machinery is great for property values. I will bury you, she hissed, her corporate veneer totally cracking. I will make your life a living hell. By the time I'm done, you'll be begging me to take that house for a tenth of what I just offered you. Do your worst, Sophia, I said. But just a heads up, if your construction crew blocks my driveway, I'm calling a tow truck. And I promise you, I have nothing but time on my hands. I turned around and walked out of the office. I didn't look back. I walked past the receptionist, pushed through the heavy glass doors, and got back into the elevator. When the doors closed, I leaned against the back wall and let out a shaky breath. I had just declared war on a real estate empire. I had zero plan. I had no money to fight them in court if they decided to try eminent domain or some other obscure legal avenue. All I had was a piece of paper that said the house was mine. I drove back to the east side. When I pulled up to the curb, there was a large U-Haul van parked in the driveway. The front door of the house was propped wide open. I walked inside. The living room was halfway stripped. The expensive rugs were rolled up. The mid-century modern coffee table was gone. Delaney was standing in the kitchen aggressively shoving her espresso machine into a cardboard box. She looked up when I walked in. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her face was locked in a tight, furious scowl. Don't worry, she snapped, aggressively taping the box shut. I'm leaving. I paid a couple of guys off TaskRabbit to help me load the big stuff. I'll be out by 5. Where are you going? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't care, but the silence in the house felt oppressive. A friend's couch in Domain, she muttered, not looking at me. Since my former partner decided to extort me out of my only financial safety net. You extorted yourself when you committed wire fraud, Delaney. I just sped up the consequences. She stopped taping the box. She gripped the edge of the granite island, her knuckles white, and finally looked up at me. There was no sadness left in her, just pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you won?" she asked, her voice dropping to a low, bitter whisper. "You think kicking me out makes you the winner? You're keeping a house you can't afford, in a neighborhood that's about to be swallowed whole by people who have 100 times your net worth. Sorel is going to chew you up and spit you out. You're going to end up with nothing." "I'll take my chances," I said. "Whatever," she scoffed, turning back to her boxes. "You always were incredibly stubborn and incredibly stupid at the exact same time." I didn't engage. I walked down the hall to the master bedroom. I hadn't stepped foot in it for 3 months. It looked exactly the same, but it felt entirely foreign. Her clothes were half cleared out of the closet. The bed was stripped down to the mattress. I stood in the doorway, staring at the empty space, feeling a bizarre mix of absolute triumph and profound emptiness. By 5:30 p.m., the U-Haul was fully loaded. The 2 TaskRabbit guys slammed the back doors shut. Delaney walked out the front door, a heavy canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked past me, dropped her house key onto the front porch, got into her car, and drove away. I stood on the porch, listening to the silence settle over the property. I bent down and picked up the key. It was warm from sitting in the afternoon sun. I put it in my pocket, walked back inside, and locked the deadbolt. The house was mine. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down on one of the remaining bar stools at the island. I pulled out my phone and called Cormac. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me you didn't back down." "I didn't back down," I said, taking a sip of the cold beer. "Delaney signed it. She's gone. She just drove off with a U-Haul. Thank God." Cormac exhaled loudly. "So it's over. You're the sole owner." "Not exactly," I said. "Sorel Holdings wasn't just trying to flip the property. I went to see Sophia. They own the entire block. Cormac, every single parcel around me. They're building a $60 million complex, and my house is sitting right in the middle of their footprint. They break ground in 45 days. Dead silence on the other end of the line. "Are you serious?" Cormac finally asked. "Dead serious." She showed me the blueprints. "If I don't sell to them, they're going to box me in. 3 years of heavy construction. Dust. Noise. Zero rental viability. They're going to try and choke me out financially." "Did she offer to buy it?" "Yeah. Market value plus 10%. "And you didn't take it?" Cormac asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "Man, I hate these people as much as you do, but that is a massive payday. You could have walked away clean." "I know," I said, staring at the empty kitchen. "But if I take their money, they win. They broke up my life, they manipulated me, they treated me like garbage, and they still get exactly what they want. I can't let them win." "Okay, pride is great," Cormac said, the typing starting up on his mechanical keyboard in the background. "But pride doesn't pay a $3,400 mortgage when your property is uninhabitable. What is your actual plan?" "I don't have one," I admitted. "That's why I'm calling you. I need a way to hit them back, a way to stall the construction, or hurt their financing. Something that makes me more dangerous to them than they are to me." "You want me to fight a multi-million-dollar private equity firm?" Cormac laughed, but it was a dry, nervous sound. "I'm a software developer, man. I found some Slack logs. I don't know anything about commercial real estate law." "You know data," I said, "and these people leave a digital footprint. They have to. They've been buying up properties on the east side for 2 years. They have city council variances. They have permits. They have investors. Look into Sorel Holdings. Find me a crack in their foundation. There has to be a reason they need my parcel so badly right now." Cormac sighed. "Fine. Give me 48 hours. I'll scrape public records, LLC registries, and whatever zoning board minutes I can find. But I'm telling you right now, if they have their permits locked in, you're bringing a butter knife to a gunfight." "Just look," I said. I hung up the phone. I finished my beer in the quiet kitchen. As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the hardwood floors, I realized I had to actually sleep here tonight, in a house that suddenly felt 10 times too big and terrifyingly empty. I didn't sleep in the guest room, and I didn't sleep in the master. I took a blanket, laid down on the sofa in the living room, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. The next morning, the reality of my situation hit me hard. I had 30 days before my next mortgage payment was due. The refinance was going to increase my monthly output slightly because interest rates had jumped since Delaney and I originally bought the place. I needed income. Immediately, I opened my laptop and started looking at short-term rental platforms. If I couldn't get a long-term tenant because of the impending construction, maybe I could milk the house as an Airbnb for the next 45 days before the bulldozers showed up. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would buy me a month or two of cash flow to fight Sorel. I spent the entire day deep cleaning the house. I scrubbed the baseboards, patched the drywall where Delaney had thrown the coffee mug, and rearranged the remaining furniture to make the rooms look less empty. I took wide-angle photos on my phone trying to capture the mid-century charm of the architecture while intentionally cropping out the vacant lots next door. I listed the property at 4 p.m. By 8 p.m., I had my first booking. A 3-night stay starting the following Tuesday. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. I was sitting on the front porch, drinking a glass of cheap bourbon and watching the fireflies in the overgrown grass when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an unknown number, not the one Cormac used, and not the one Sophia had texted from. I answered it. "Hello, I hear you're being a nuisance." The voice was male, smooth, relaxed, with a faint Texas drawl. "Who is this?" I asked, gripping the glass tighter. "My name is Griffin," the voice said. "The broker you pretended to hire to scare my sister. Sophia tells me you rejected accepted a very generous cash offer. Griffin, the friend I had lied about to Sophia, claiming he was my broker. I hadn't made the name up. Griffin was a real guy I had met a few years ago at a networking event, but he wasn't my broker. How did you get this number? I asked, sitting up straight. I have my ways. Griffin chuckled. Listen, man, I'm not calling to threaten you. I actually respect the play. You gutted your ex-girlfriend and called Sophia's bluff. That takes guts. But you're swimming in the deep end now, and you don't know how to tread water. If you're calling to make another offer on behalf of Sorrel Holdings, you can save your breath. I don't work for Sorrel Holdings, Griffin said. I work for their biggest competitor, and I think we have a mutual interest in making sure Sophia's little development project never breaks ground. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in the porch chair. The wood creaked under my weight. Griffin laid it out. His firm had been tracking Sorrel's acquisitions on the east side for over a year. They knew about the $60 million project, but more importantly, they knew exactly how Sorrel was financing it. They're over-leveraged, Griffin explained, his voice crackling slightly over the connection. Sophia and Blake convinced their board to take out a massive mezzanine loan to cover the construction costs before the interest rates hiked again. But that loan has a strict covenant. They have to break ground in 45 days, and they have to build exactly what they got zoned for, 60 units. If they alter the footprint, they have to re-permit with the city. That process takes 6 to 8 months. The loan defaults in 3, and they can't build 60 units without my parcel for the parking ramp, I said. The puzzle pieces clicking together in the dark. Exactly, Griffin said. Austin zoning requires 1.5 parking spots per unit. Without your dirt, they don't have the square footage for the underground garage. The city will force them to scale down to a 20-unit building. The math on their loan completely implodes at 20 units. They'll default, the bank will seize the 6 parcels they already bought, and my firm will swoop in and buy the entire block at auction for 40 cents on the dollar. So you want me to hold out? I want to make sure you hold out, Griffin corrected. Sophia offered you market plus 10%. She's desperate. By next week, she'll offer you market plus 50. In 2 weeks, when the bank starts breathing down her neck, she'll offer double. I know you're angry, but eventually, everyone has a price. I don't want you to hit yours. What's your play then? I buy your house tomorrow, Griffin said simply, for exactly 3 times the current market appraisal. Cash, no contingencies. We close in 4 days. But here's the kicker. Before the transfer, we write a restrictive covenant into the deed, a permanent conservation easement. No commercial development or multifamily zoning can ever be applied to that specific lot. Even if Sorrel tries to buy it from us later, it's totally useless to them. It stays a single-family residential island forever. I took a slow sip of the bourbon. The burn felt incredible going down. You're willing to pay triple just to screw them over? I'm willing to pay triple because buying your house for a premium nets my firm a $20 million discount when we buy Sorrel's foreclosed parcels in 6 months. It's not personal. It's just math. I'll email you the contract right now. Have a lawyer look it over. If you're in, we sign at my office at 9:00 a.m. The email chimed in my inbox 10 seconds later. I opened the PDF right there on the porch. I looked at the purchase price on page 2. It was a number so large it didn't even process as real money. It was never worry about a mortgage again money. It was buy a cabin in Oregon and turn off my phone for a year money. The next morning, I sat in a glass conference room downtown, 3 blocks away from Sophia's office, and signed my name 22 times. The wire hit my account 48 hours later. I spent the weekend packing up the last of my things. I didn't need much. Most of the furniture was Delaney's anyway. I left it for Griffin's firm to deal with. He told me they were planning to rent the house out to a group of college musicians at a severe loss, just to ensure the property stayed occupied, loud, and a permanent, legally protected thorn in Sorrel's side. On Tuesday morning, I loaded my dog into the passenger seat of my SUV. The back was packed with 3 suitcases, my toolbox, and a cooler. I locked the front door of 1402 East 4th for the last time. I walked down the driveway, the morning humidity already sticking to my shirt. The overgrown vacant lot next door looked exactly the same, but it felt entirely different now. It was a graveyard. As I opened the driver's side door, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. The county clerk just published the deed transfer. A permanent residential easement? You didn't just sell it. You poisoned the well. Do you have any idea what you just did to my firm? I read the message twice. I pictured her sitting behind that massive walnut desk, staring at a blueprint that was now completely, irreversibly useless. I thought about the bridge loan clock ticking down. I thought about Blake's smug face holding my whiskey glass. I thought about Delaney sitting on a couch in the Domain, having traded her half of a multi-million-dollar gold mine for the privilege of not going to federal prison. I didn't reply. I blocked the number, tossed the phone into the cup holder, and put the car in drive. The Austin skyline faded in the rearview mirror as I merged onto I-35 North. I rolled the windows down. The hot Texas air rushed in, drowning out the radio. I had absolutely no idea where I was sleeping that night, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't care.